Hi, I'm Tom Luna. I'm a former school board member. I was privileged to serve as senior advisor to U.S. Secretary of Education Rod Page. I also had the honor of serving for 8 years as Idaho State Superintendent of Public Instruction. During that time, I also served as president of the Council of Chief State School Officers. One thing I have learned in all these experiences is that educating children is not rocket science, it's more complicated. On my podcast, Swimming Upstream, we will visit with courageous leaders who challenge the prevailing tide and inspire all of us to swim against the current. Let's jump in.
Welcome back to another episode of Swimming Upstream. I'm your host, Tom Luna, and today we are at the ASU+GSV conference in San Diego, and we're taking this opportunity to visit with education leaders from across the country. And today we are visiting with Cheryl Carrier, who is with the Ford Next Generation Learning. And Cheryl, welcome to Swimming Upstream.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and as I learned more about the work that you do, I think there's a lot of relevant things that your organization is involved in, specifically the program Next Generation Learning. But first, let's talk a little bit about you. Tell us where you're from, kind of your background a bit, and how you ended up as the executive director of this group.
Okay, well, it's not terribly exciting, but I grew up in Michigan, down in the Detroit metro area, and worked for Ford my whole life. My family, my mom and dad both worked for Ford.
Generational.
Yep.
Automotive.
You got it.
Yeah.
And they said, you don't know what you want to do in life. You're not sure. So you're going to go work for Ford. And that I did. I think part of the reason that I love what I do so much is because I really didn't have a clue what was out there and what was available to me. And so that's why this work is so important to me. But anyway, worked for Ford most of my life, took a little bit of a break to go work for the Detroit Lions, came back.
That's another whole episode.
That could be.
Because you were there, you told me earlier you were there when Barry Sanders was the running back. Yeah. We'll have to do a whole episode on that maybe in the future, because I'm sure that's fascinating to a number of folks. But yeah.
It's quite an experience. Yeah,
sure.
For sure. But then I left Ford because I really wanted to live up north and, near the water and amongst nature. And so when I left, I asked if I could take the program with me to another nonprofit. And so Ford was gracious enough to let us do that. Ford incubated the program.
Yeah. So let's talk about the program then, the national or generational learning. Mm-hmm. Next generation learning, mm-hmm. right? Let's talk about next generation learning and specifically what it focuses on, and then we'll talk about how it happens.
Okay, great. So there's a little bit of a story to this, which I think is important and brings us up to date. Ford has always invested in education. They've always believed that students struggled with how are they going to use their academics in their future? Yeah. And so they were very progressive when they were thinking about how do we work with educators to help them expose young people to careers that they might not ever get a chance to learn about in a typical high school. Yeah. And so when I first came on board, there was a program that was in place. We talked about whether or not it was time to update it or maybe do something new. And we decided that we were going to develop a new program. And so we spent millions.
When was this?
That was in early 2000s.
Okay.
About 2001. And so Ford Philanthropy gave us the money to develop a curriculum that exposed students to lots of different careers, had nothing to do with the automotive companies at all. But what we learned is that because it was out of the box and it was quite different, and teachers had to work together in teams and business partners got involved in the curriculum, there needed to be teacher professional development. And so we learned a lot from that program, but about 2 or 3 years into it, I started to have some sleepless nights because what I was seeing was that it was highly dependent on a person. If a teacher left or a principal left, it went away. right?
And school districts even today struggle with that issue, right? Yeah, about the success of a program lasting longer than the one person, right? That tends to be the magic.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's, you often hear from teachers, it's the next shiny thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I really felt as though we needed to, while we did a good job of what we did, we needed to learn from that and take that great knowledge, but we had to think about how do we do this in a way that's scalable and sustainable and available to all students. And that was when I discovered the Career Academy model. For those of you that don't know what a Career Academy is, I mean, it is a small learning community where students are learning their academics through the lens of something that they might be interested in doing in their future. And it's generally pretty broad, but what I love about the Career Academy model is that you've got a team of teachers, academic and career and technical education teachers, and they're aligned with employers in that particular field. And they're developing projects together that students are working on with their local employers. So students are not just learning their academics in a meaningful way, but they're also making connections to their community. They're starting to better understand why and how am I going to use my academics. The employers are helping them understand what are the skills and mindsets that you need to be successful. And what we see is students are more engaged in their learning, graduation rates are going up, discipline's going down, all the things you want to see, right?
When kids see relevance to what they're learning, we hear that so often, right? Where students are like, where am I ever going to use this, right? Exactly. And so what I found, and it sounds like what you're saying, is when students see relevance in what they're learning, then rigor will take care of itself.
Absolutely.
But if they don't see relevance, it's difficult to get kids to perform at their highest abilities, right? Because they just don't see how they're ever going to use this until it's too late, right? And they get out into the real world and realize they don't have the skills or the knowledge that is in demand in the workforce, and then it sounds like it exposes them to career options, and so they're not making a decision at as a freshman or sophomore about a specific track, but they're exposed to a number of different career type opportunities.
Exactly. I mean, it's a perfect example of, let's just take health, right?
Yeah.
I want to be a nurse or I want to be a doctor, but you might learn about anesthesiology. You might want to learn about public policy, right? They have HR departments. So you could be exposed to veterinary medicine, right? Students get an opportunity to sort of take a peek at all of those different things, particularly if they have an interest in something, and they can go deeper. But I think
these like modules that to get kind of to take a look, for example, at nursing, or to take a look at anesthesiology. Is that how they're exposed to these things, to learn just a bit about, to see if there's an interest level there?
So they do a lot of in freshman academy. They do a lot of exploration.
Yeah.
And they start to. The first thing that they do is they start to learn about themselves. What am I good at? What do I tend to like? Am I an introvert? Am I an extrovert? Do I, want to be in front of the camera, behind the camera? Those kinds of things, right? But then they start to look at what academies are available in their district, and these academies are always aligned to the workforce and economic development needs of a region. So, we make sure that the academies that are being built, there are jobs at the end of these the young people's education to go to, whether it's, right out of high school or into post-secondary. So freshman academy is really important because they get exposed to what's out there. But once they're in their academy, they start to work on authentic projects with their local employers. And if they have an interest in something that might be different, they can ask, right? They can say, well, what about, public health or policy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that something that I might be interested in? And then the business partners can begin to expose them to that, right? So it's a bit fluid once they're in the academy, but they have the resources of the partners and the teachers to help them be exposed to what's available to them.
All right. Let's get into a little bit more details about how this actually happens, and then maybe you could share with us some examples of where it's been implemented for a while. But what I found in doing some learning about the program is that it may be fluid. It is different from district to district, but there is some foundational groundwork that is laid. There's some expectations about school culture and a number of those things that have to be part of the equation. So talk about that. I think you have the 3-part transformational model, and then you have the 5 phases. So let's get into those transformational models, those 3, and then also the phases.
Yeah, so we call those 3 sort of, they're the foundation of the work that we do, right?
Yeah.
We call that our framework. And it's really important. So the first thing, and where we started with this work a long time ago, was how do you transform teaching and learning to be more authentic and real and relevant?
Yeah.
And give students the opportunity to develop those transferable skills, those critical workplace skills that everybody needs to be successful.
Yeah.
Thinking critically, problem solving, working together in teams, valuing diverse opinions, right? That is one of the strands. It's how do you transform teaching and learning, right? You cannot transform teaching and learning unless you're transforming sort of the systems and structures inside the school. And what I mean by that is with the model that we use, we've got teams of teachers working together. It's not a math teacher going in their classroom and shutting the door and teaching math.
Yeah.
Right? They're collaborating with that career and technical education teacher and local business partners to say, how do I make math more relevant in this context that the student wants to learn in? So there's a mind shift that has to happen between the adults and the district, right? And the teachers. And sometimes that's the hardest thing to do, right? They're used to teaching a certain way. So transforming that structure and the culture of the schools is really important. And then the third strand is how do you transform the way that the larger community engages in this and engages in it, not in a one-off sort of way, but a really powerful, meaningful way where they're building relationships with these young people in these academies, where they're building relationships with teachers, and teachers are going out and doing teacher externships so they can learn about.
So the teachers get in, spend some time in the career that their students will in their academies will be learning about. Yeah, yeah. So they bring some real world experience and maybe a different perspective and understanding. Yeah.
I mean, it is really transformational because everybody has to change in this model. But what we find is once the teachers start collaborating, they love it. I mean, they are so excited and proud of their teams. And you got a counselor as part of that team. Everybody knows the young people in those academies. They know them well.
Yeah.
And they don't let them fall through the cracks, right? If something's going on with Johnny, somebody knows what's happening. And, they're there to...
How do the school districts navigate, sometimes policies and funding formulas can be, and accountability systems can be barriers to some of the things that you've talked about because, school leaders see this as an excellent opportunity for their students, but they've got, for example, a state accountability system says this is what you're going to be measured against. That's going to get the attention of the decision makers. The funding formula, what's going to, what do we do to get the most money out of the funding formula? I mean, that's just, this isn't being critical, right? No. It's just from my experience at the state level. And so when you look at some of these districts that want to make some of these changes, how do they navigate some of those, or is it just not that difficult to navigate the way that you've implemented these?
If there's a will, there's a way, right? And truthfully, what I love about this being a transformation model is that if every child is going through this there's an opportunity to throw the budget against the wall and peel it back.
Yeah.
So what is it that you don't need anymore? What is it that you're doing that has nothing to do with this model? And how can we repurpose that?
Yeah.
Right? When it isn't a transformation model and there are several different models, that's when you kind of run into issues with funding. I also think that the business community can play a really big role in advocacy, and we've seen it, where they've gone to the state and advocated for changes. But the truth is that, the standards still need to be met. They're going to be met and they're going to be, it's going to be more successful because students are learning in context.
Yeah.
So you're going to see things going in the right direction because the young people want to be there in the classroom.
So let's talk about what when you and I were talking earlier, I mentioned my experience being on a local school board, and I learned a lot there, and it was a great experience. But there was a few eye-opening experiences, and that is just getting the community at large and the business community, in specifically. Involved and staying involved. That's to bring about that long-term systemic change, right? So yeah, talk about how, what that outreach looks like, and what are some of the things that you are asking business community to do. Many of them get frustrated because they think they just want us to write a check, right? And some of them will go as far as saying they really don't think we have anything to offer academically, which turns them off, right? And so talk about just how how this engagement with the community actually, what's the genesis of it, and actually how it happens, and how this group stays involved long term.
Okay. Well, this goes to the roadmap, the 5-phase roadmap that you talked about. And this is really important. And it's something we've learned along the way. We didn't always have 5 phases to the roadmap. But over time, we've learned what kind of support a community needs. And our communities have told us this is what we need. And so we've made adjustments, right? So
let's talk about those 5 phases then. Starts with explore.
So, yep.
Okay.
Phase 1 is all about exploration, and it's really important. So we have a lot of conversations before we actually go into a community. It's usually with the district level people, kind of high level district people. Generally, there's some people from the community that want to know more about this and want to understand it better. But we will send in a team of people that will go in and spend 2, 3, 4 days, depending on how big the district is. And they will dig in and ask questions. They will meet with teachers. They'll meet with parents. They'll meet with students. They'll meet with business partners. They'll meet with the chamber, workforce and economic development intermediaries, administrators. And they're just asking questions like, what's working here? What's really going well? What are you struggling with? What has the relationship been like with the district if you're an employer? What would you like to see different? Do you feel
what's the quality of the graduate that's coming into your workforce, that type of stuff? Okay.
Absolutely. And at the end of that visit, our team will go back and write a report. And it's not a gotcha report. It's a report that it's what we've learned and seen. And we come back to them, and it's sort of a recommendations and findings report, or findings and recommendations report. And we sit down with the community and we say, did we get it right? Like, take a look at this. Did we hit it right? Where are we wrong? We need to understand everything. We talk to board members. We need to know where people stand when it comes to transformation and, really wanting to change. So it's not just about learning about what's good or bad, right? But it's also about the willingness to actually go down this path. So that's important. At the end of that, they have a report that's useful to them. And if they choose to move on, then we move to the next phase, which is...
So there's some expectation for how they respond to the report and the recommendations.
Yeah. And I mean, let's, to be perfectly honest, there are times when we say, maybe you're not quite ready. We'll help you get ready, but you need to get your board aligned, right? You need to make sure that your superintendent, we're not dragging them through the sand, right? People need to be on board. Is there somebody in the community that can actually bring people together, that have the clout to bring the larger community together around this? Most of the time, we're in pretty good shape to move forward, but there are times when we say we need to take some time to work with you on this.
Pause button while we work on some things.
Yep. So then phase 2 is envision. It's really about broadening sort of the conversation at the community level, but it's also about sending the community and the district to see what this looks like in action. So we have 2 places that we send people right now. That's Nashville, and that's also Akron. And so they will go spend 2.5 days and really dig deeply into, what does this look like on the ground? They'll talk to teachers and students and parents and administrators and business people.
So they get an idea that this is possible. This can be done.
Yep. And we also have a shorter version for high-level people in the community that just need to understand from a very high level, what are we getting into? So those are kind of executive tracks, or one-day kind of events. At the end of that, typically by the end of that phase, we know that there's somebody in the community that can convene. And while we don't pick that organization, it's the workforce people, or it could be a nonprofit, but they got the clout to bring businesses and others to the table, civic leaders, stuff like that. That's important because we need somebody who represents the community who's going to own that part of this work with the district. So the district's going to work on the internal stuff, but we need somebody externally that's going to partner, and they're going to do this work together.
And the expectations on both sides are very clear. Is that? I think that's what you do. What you're describing to us, right?
Yes. So the next phase is about getting clarity. So phase 3 is about doing the planning, right? We're writing that plan. We call it a master plan, but it's a strategic plan for how we're going to transform the district. And so that's where we begin to lay out what are the structures and systems that need to be in place? How are we going to hold ourselves accountable? Who's going to be responsible for aspects of the plan? There's certain tactics, right, that we know have to be in place in order to do this right. What we do, though, is we're sort of humble consultants. So we don't say you have to do it this way, right? But we work with the community to say what happens first. Where are you at now? What would be the best approach, right? So the plan is written in phase 3. There's a huge celebration after it's been approved by our team, usually always at the community level. It's another opportunity to tell the story about the change that's going on.
And some of these plans may take some board action.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Especially if there's funding involved. Sometimes the funding is split between the community and the district. Sometimes it's picked up mostly by the district, but usually there's some help from the community to make this transformation. And then phase 4 is all about implementation. And by the way, I would be a liar if I told you that didn't start happening in phase 3, because the business community want to go.
Oh yeah, they're ready to go. They're ready to go. Yeah.
So that's usually where Freshman Academy begins to happen in that implementation plan. So things are starting to move, and then we've spent a couple of years in implementation. And then ultimately you get to phase 5, where it's really about deepening your systems and your process, stepping back and saying, what have we learned? What needs to change? Building distributed leadership, and really about paying it forward.
Yeah.
So, every community has learned from other communities in our network, and now, these communities can help new communities navigate.
And it's when you talk about go further and stuff, is there a process in place to continue to make sure that the courses and the career technical education it's still in demand and relevant to the community or to the region?
Yes. So when you develop that strategic plan and the way that we work with the district, there's regular check-ins, and there are times when these tactic teams and the internal and external sort of leads are coming together, and they're saying what's working, what isn't, what needs to change, where can we help? And this is a process where I think amazing things come out of it, because what happens is the larger community, I believe, really begins to understand the complexity of education.
Yeah.
I think they just think, well, they're putting young people in seats and they're teaching them, but it's so much more than that, right?
Yeah.
You got kids coming to school who are hungry, they've got emotional issues, they've got family issues. And once these partners start to engage with these students and the teachers, they understand that this is really complex.
Yeah, I tell people education isn't rocket science, it's a lot more difficult.
It's a great point. I love it. I'm going to actually quote you on that.
Yeah, it's a lot more difficult.
It is.
You mentioned that there's the reality of the students coming to school with different demographics and different needs, different strengths. Talk about, an urban implementation, a suburban implementation, a rural implementation, how this program would work in those settings.
So the interesting thing about this, when I really landed on the Career Academy model, what got me excited was that I saw it work in all kinds of settings with all kinds of students. So one of the first things I heard was one of the first academies I visited in California. It was actually in Elk Grove. And I remember talking to a young woman, and I said, what makes this so special? Why do you love your school and the work that you're doing in the academy? And by the way, they don't know school any different, right?
Yeah.
All they know is the academy model. So they don't know how.
Because they came in as freshmen, they went through the freshman experience, and they just stayed on that course.
Yeah, they weren't sitting in rows, right? They've never done that. But what she said to me was, there are people in this classroom that I wouldn't even talk to. And they're now my family. Like, we care about each other. We work together. We look out for each other. Has nothing to do with academics, right?
Yeah.
But what I saw was this sort of, I've got a family. And for so many students that don't have that at home, they have a place where they can go to and they know that they're cared about. And the teachers and the students and the business partners are there for them. So the other reason that I loved it was that, I was a student that had to learn in context, and I struggled with math a great deal. And it wasn't until I was older in life and I had a little side business where my husband said, you realize you're doing algebra, right? And I thought, I was a pretty smart kid, but I was a hands-on learner.
Yeah.
And, I didn't get outstanding grades. I mean, they weren't horrible, it was a B, But what excites me is when you see these young people that are really struggling and they're, all of a sudden the light goes off, right?
Yeah.
And
it goes on.
Right. And so, there's nothing like that when they begin to understand, like, oh, I get it now, and I understand why I need to learn this.
You talked about, the kids have never been in an experience, at least their high school experience, where they're sitting in rows and stuff. Describe what a classroom looks like.
Yeah. And let me just follow up before I go any further. We have districts that when they came to us, they were at graduation rates that were 58, 60%, right? And they're now at 82, 83, 84%.
Oh, wow. And what period of time then?
Over 5 years, right?
Wow.
They jumped, right?
That's
you
incredible.
take Nashville, it really, but then you've got districts that have graduation rates that are 92, 93, 94, 98%. Why do they come? Because they know that those young people are making bad decisions about their future.
Okay.
They're going off to college, but they're not completing. Or they're going
they have a bunch of debt.
That's right.
Yeah.
And parents are like, oh my God.
What was that about?
Right, exactly. And I'm sorry, I totally lost your question.
I was just talking, let's talk about a rural implementation. Obviously, the in-demand type or jobs there are going to be different. I'll lead you a bit, living in a rural part of Idaho, which is rural. And the kind of skills and knowledge that's necessary to be even a successful farmer. I'll just use that because people might have a view of a farmer, somebody's just digging in the dirt all the time. But the amount of math, the amount of science, the amount of technology that is now used, drones and all this kind of stuff that's used in farming today. But if you're, so talk about just implementation in a rural community. Have you had experiences with your program in those communities?
For sure. Yep. I mean, I think what you face in a rural community is you don't have the same level of business partners. Like you don't have you might not have 10, you wouldn't have 10 academies, different pathways, right? Because you can't, you have a small group of young people, maybe you got 1,600 students in a high school, probably not.
No, that would,
right?
that would be, yeah.
So, your pathways look a little bit different. They're a little broader. You might, and you don't have the same amount of business partners. So, it does look different, but, you still have, usually there's healthcare nearby, there's stores nearby. So there may be entrepreneurial things that you could be doing. Certainly, farming, agriculture is huge.
Fabrication and those kinds of, in business itself, entrepreneurial skills that are necessary, right?
The pathways look different.
Yeah.
Some of the experiences may look different, but there's still the opportunity to connect with your community. Whether it's, when I think about even nonprofit partners, right?
Yeah.
So every community is different, but you pull in, the good things that are happening there and those people that really want to be part of these young people's lives.
Yeah.
And I always say that I believe employers come because they need a talent development pipeline. But the truth is they stay because they know they're making a difference in young people's lives. And their employees love being with these young people.
Yeah.
So it's also quality life.
It's a win-win.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You got it.
Well, listen, tell people how they can learn more about the program, learn more about the next generation learning, and where they can go to learn more about it. I suspect that people will watch this and they're going to be curious. So tell us how we can learn more.
Well, you can go to the website, www.ford NGL, Next Generation Learning, NGL.com. There's a link on there if you want to talk to us.
Okay.
We usually are back in touch with you within 2 or 3 days. It's usually me, and I'm on the road. So, but that's the best way to find out. You can always look me up on LinkedIn, Cheryl Carrier. I'll give you my email.
Why don't you show that?
CC.
On there for everybody to see.
It's CCARRIER at FordNGL.com. And we love what we do.
I can tell.
We really do. And we build partnerships and friendships for life.
Yeah.
We've got communities in our network that have been with us for 16 years.
Yeah.
And it is a family itself. And people will tell you that when they become part of the network. It's the Ford NGL family. So.
Well, it's been a pleasure to have you on Swimming Upstream, and to share what you've done and what you've built, and the work that just continues to grow and expand. That it's very relevant to the world that we live in today, and to bring about the kind of engagement that it's going to take in order to make these shifts in the school. It's not going to happen just because a school board and an administrator and a handful of administrators and teachers decide something needs to change. It's going to take the whole community, business and chambers and everything, right?
That's why we call it community-connected learning.
There you go.
Yep.
I like that.
Yeah.
So, Cheryl, we always ask our guest to share with us one piece of trivia about your state, Michigan, that most people wouldn't know.
Well, so I'm a scuba diver.
Okay, cool.
And I don't do much of it lately. I'm too busy.
So all those Great Lakes,
I've been
scuba dived in them.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, all right.
And we have thousands of shipwrecks in the Great Lakes. And it's fabulously beautiful. We're surrounded by water, and it's glorious and gorgeous, but can be very, very rough terrain. And if you're out there and it turns on you, it can be deadly.
Well, before we started, we mentioned the Edmund Fitzgerald. We know, because of our age, we know the song and we know the story because of the song. But you've done scuba diving and looked at some of these different wrecks and stuff like that. Wow, that's fascinating.
And the deeper they are, the more intact they are. So it's pretty remarkable.
I think when most people see a body of water and it isn't an ocean, they don't assume that there's cargo ships or whatever that have sunk there and stuff. But,
oh yeah, there's some big ships. Yep.
Oh, fascinating. Well, thank you for being on Swimming Upstream, and thanks for all the great work that you and the Next Generation Learning group is doing. And we look forward to hearing more in the future.
Thank you for listening. And remember, our children may only be 22% of our population, but they represent 100% of our future. If you found this conversation valuable, subscribe to our YouTube channel and find us on your favorite podcast platform. Swimming Upstream is part of the Strategos Podcast Network. To view the entire lineup of our shows, visit our website, strategosgroup.com.